The morning sun rose over the golden fields of Taiyang 4, painting the endless rows of grain in shades of amber and gold. From orbit, the planet looked peaceful. Thousands of acres of farmland stretched across the valleys, broken only by clusters of simple buildings and the occasional warehouse. To anyone watching from space, it was exactly what the records claimed: a quiet agricultural colony on the edge of human territory. Commander Thexmore stood on the bridge of his warship, studying the holographic display before him. His scaled fingers tapped against the console as he examined every detail of the human settlement below. The Valkyrie Empire had been expanding for decades, and this world was next on their list. It sat in a perfect location, rich with resources and far from any major human military base. 50,000 humans, his intelligence officer reported. Most of them are farmers. They grow grain, vegetables, and protein crops. Their exports feed 6 other colonies in the sector. Thexmore's eyes narrowed as he zoomed in on the largest settlement. He could see the humans moving between buildings, driving their farming vehicles across the fields. Everything looked normal. Too normal, perhaps, but he pushed the thought aside. The Valkyrie had conquered dozens of worlds like this. Agricultural colonies were always easy targets. Their inhabitants were civilians, not soldiers. They surrendered quickly when faced with real military power. "What about defenses?" he asked. "Minimal," the officer replied. "They have a small security force, maybe 500 personnel. Light weapons only. No orbital defenses detected. No military spacecraft. They have some transport ships for cargo, but nothing that could threaten us." Thexmore allowed himself a small smile. This would be over quickly. The humans would surrender. The Valkyrie Empire would gain another productive world, and he would receive a commendation. Perhaps even a promotion. Down on the surface, Daewon walked through the central administration building. He wore simple clothes, the kind a colony manager would wear. His office was modest, filled with reports about crop yields and weather patterns. On his desk sat a family photo and a half-empty cup of coffee. Everything about him suggested a man concerned with harvests, not wars. He pressed a button on his desk and a screen flickered to life. The face of a woman appeared, her expression calm and professional. "Morning, Hana," Daewon said. "How are the fields looking today?" Hana smiled from her position in what appeared to be a greenhouse complex. Behind her, workers moved between rows of plants, checking growth rates and soil conditions. "Everything is on schedule. The grain in Sector 7 is ready for harvesting. The vegetable crops in Sector 3 need another week. Yields are exceeding our projections by 12%. "Excellent," Daewon replied. He paused, then added in a quieter tone, "Any word from our friends in orbit?" Hana's smile didn't change, but her eyes became sharper. "Their surveillance drones have made 6 passes over the colony in the last 2 days. They're definitely interested in us." "Let them look," Daewon said. "Make sure everyone stays in character. We're just farmers trying to make a living out here." "Understood," Hana said, and the screen went dark. Daewon stood and walked to his window. From here he could see the massive grain silos that dominated the colony's skyline. They rose like silver towers, each one large enough to store months of harvest. Workers moved around their bases, operating machinery and checking equipment. To any observer, it was a typical day on an agricultural world. But Daewon knew better. He had helped build this place 3 years ago. Every building, every field, every piece of equipment had been chosen carefully. Nothing here was quite what it seemed. A few kilometers away, June sat in the security office reviewing reports from his team. On paper, he commanded 500 security personnel responsible for protecting the colony from wild animals and settling minor disputes. His office was small and unremarkable, with basic equipment and outdated computers. He glanced at his watch. The trade delegation would arrive in 2 hours. It was all part of the show, of course. Human corporations sent representatives every few months to inspect the colony and negotiate contracts. The visits helped maintain the illusion that Taiyang 4 was nothing more than a productive farm world. But June knew that the Valkyrie were watching. Their sensors would track the delegation's ship, record their conversations, analyze every aspect of the visit. The Valkyrie needed to believe that humans saw this world as valuable only for its agricultural output. The delegation arrived on schedule. 3 men and 2 women in corporate uniforms stepped off their transport ship, carrying data tablets and wearing professional smiles. Daewon met them at the landing pad, shaking hands and welcoming them warmly. "Thank you for visiting Taiyang 4, he said. I hope you'll be pleased with what we've accomplished this season. He led them on a tour through the colony. They walked through the fields where massive harvesting machines moved slowly through the grain, cutting and collecting tons of crops every hour. The visitors marveled at the efficiency of the operation. These harvesters are impressive, one of the delegates said. They're much larger than standard models. We need them to be, Day One explained. The fields here are enormous. We modified the harvesters for heavy-duty work. They can operate for weeks without maintenance. What he didn't mention was that each harvester had been built with reinforced armor plating. Their engines were powerful enough to move heavy military equipment. Their operators were trained in both agricultural work and combat tactics. The group visited the fertilizer plant next, a sprawling complex of buildings and processing equipment. Hana met them there, explaining the chemical processes that created the nutrients needed for their crops. The delegates asked technical questions and Hana answered them smoothly, discussing nitrogen levels and pH balance. None of them noticed the reinforced walls or the unusual size of the storage tanks. None of them realized that the fertilizer being produced included chemical compounds useful for much more than growing plants. In the afternoon, they toured the grain silos. The delegates stood at the base of the massive structures, looking up at the silver towers that stretched into the sky. How much can you store here? A delegate asked. Each silo holds 50,000 tons, Daewon replied. We have 20 of them. Enough storage for a full year's harvest if necessary. The delegates nodded, impressed. They made notes on their tablets, calculating profit margins and shipping schedules. If they had looked more carefully, they might have noticed that the silo doors were thicker than necessary. They might have wondered why the elevators inside were large enough to move heavy machinery. They might have questioned the military-grade power systems that fed each structure, but they saw what they expected to see: silos for storing grain. As the sun began to set, Daewon walked the delegates back to their ship. They thanked him for his hospitality and promised to send the new contracts within a week. Their ship lifted off smoothly, accelerating toward orbit and the jump point beyond. Daewon watched them go, his face calm. Then he turned and walked back toward the administration building. The evening shift was beginning. Workers moved through the colony, completing their tasks before nightfall. Lights came on in the residential areas. Cooking smells drifted from the cafeterias. Everything looked normal. Everything looked peaceful. High above, Commander Thexmore watched the corporate ship depart. His sensors had recorded the entire visit. The conversations, the tour, the delegates' satisfied expressions. All of it confirmed what his intelligence reports had told him. Taeyang 4 was just a farm. A profitable, well-run farm, but nothing more. He smiled and began preparing his invasion plan. This would be easy. The alarm woke everyone at dawn. Not the gentle chime that usually signaled the start of the workday, but a sharp, urgent sound that echoed through every building in the colony. Daewon was already awake, standing in the command center that most people believed was just an administration office. Around him, screens showed the night sky above Taeyang 4, and filling that sky were Velkari warships. 12 battle cruisers, Suman reported from her communication station. Her fingers moved quickly across her keyboard, tracking the enemy vessels as they settled into orbit. 4 destroyers, 30 smaller craft. They're positioning themselves above all our major settlements. Daewon nodded slowly. This was the moment they had been preparing for. 3 years of careful planning, 3 years of pretending to be simple farmers, all leading to this moment. He felt strangely calm. Open a channel, he said. Let's hear what they have to say. Suman pressed a button and Commander Thexmore's face appeared on the main screen. The Velkari commander looked confident, almost bored. Human colonists of Taeyang 4, Thexmore said. Your world now belongs to the Velkari Empire. You have 6 hours to evacuate your settlements. Any resistance will be met with force. This is your only warning. Daewon stepped forward, making sure his expression showed fear and confusion. He had practiced this look many times. Commander, please. We're just farmers here. We have families, children. Can we negotiate? There is nothing to negotiate, Thexmore replied. Evacuate or face the consequences. You have 6 hours. The screen went dark. Daewon turned to Suman. Send the message. She nodded and began typing. The message would go out on every frequency, coded in a way that looked like a panicked distress call. but anyone who knew the code would understand its real meaning. Positions. 6 hours. Ready to harvest. Across the colony, people received the message and began moving. To any observer, it looked like chaos. Families rushed to pack their belongings. Vehicles crowded the roads heading toward the transport pads. Children cried. People shouted to each other in apparent confusion. But it wasn't chaos. It was a carefully rehearsed dance. June stood in his security office, now transformed into a tactical command center. His 500 security personnel were actually just the visible portion of his force. The real number was much, much larger. All units report ready, one of his officers said. Personnel are moving to secondary positions. Civilians are securing in the bunker system. June studied the tactical map on his screen. It showed the colony from above, marked with hundreds of colored indicators. Green marks showed friendly positions. Red marks showed where the Velkari would likely land. Everything was going according to plan. Good, he said. Tell everyone to stay in character until the harvest begins. We're farmers until we're not. 5 hours later, Velkari landing craft began descending through the atmosphere. Thexmore had sent 10,000 troops divided into 3 strike forces. They would secure the main settlement, the agricultural facilities, and the storage areas. It was a standard occupation strategy, one the Velkari had used successfully on dozens of worlds. The landing craft touched down in the fields, crushing grain beneath their weight. Ramps lowered and armored Velkari soldiers poured out, weapons ready. They moved in tight formations, professional and disciplined. They found almost no resistance. A few human security guards fired some shots, then retreated quickly. The Velkari advanced through the colony, securing building after building. Humans ran before them, abandoning their homes and workplaces. It was exactly what Thexmore had expected. Too easy, muttered Krell, one of Thexmore's senior officers, as he watched the operation from orbit. The humans gave up without a real fight. They're farmers, Thexmore replied. What did you expect? They know they can't win against trained soldiers. But as the day wore on, small details began to bother him. The way the humans retreated, it was too organized. They didn't scatter randomly. They fell back in groups, always maintaining some kind of formation. And they moved toward the center of the colony, toward those massive grain silos and the fertilizer plant. One of his ground commanders reported something strange. Sir, these tractors we're finding. They're heavily built. The armor plating is much thicker than necessary for farm equipment. Another commander chimed in. The irrigation pipes we've discovered, they're the wrong size for water. And they're reinforced, like they're meant to transport something heavy. Thexmore felt the first touch of unease. He pulled up the architectural data on the grain silos, studying them more carefully. The walls were thick, very thick, and those elevators inside were enormous, far larger than needed for moving grain. Send scouts to the silos, he ordered. I want detailed reports on those structures. On the ground, a squad of Velkari soldiers approached the nearest silo. They found the main door sealed but not locked. One of them pulled it open and they stepped inside, weapons raised. The interior was dark and cavernous. Their light swept across the space, revealing what looked like a normal storage facility, but something felt wrong. The floor was too strong, like it was built to hold much more weight than grain, and there were track marks, as if heavy machinery had been moved in and out regularly. Command, this is Scout Team 3, their leader reported. These silos are strange. They're overbuilt for grain storage. The power systems are... His words cut off as night fell over Taeyang 4. In the bunker beneath the administration building, Dai-Wan checked his watch. 6 hours had passed since the Velkari ultimatum. The enemy forces held positions throughout the colony. They thought they had won. It was time to show them the truth. He pressed a button on his console. All units, he said quietly. Begin the harvest. Across the colony, Sumin sent out a simple signal, just 3 words on a coded frequency. The harvest begins. Nothing happened for exactly 10 seconds. Then the grain silos opened. The massive doors that the Velkari scouts had been examining suddenly rolled upward with a deep mechanical sound. Light spilled out from the interiors, bright and harsh, and from within those silos, from the darkness that the Velkari thought held only grain, came something else entirely. Combat mechs. Hundreds of them. They were 15 feet tall, painted in colors that matched the farmland around them. Their weapon systems powered up with a whine that rose to a scream. and they began moving out of the silos one after another, a metal army emerging from what everyone had believed were simple storage buildings. The Velkari soldiers stared in shock. One of them managed to get off a report. "Command. The silos, they're not silos. They're deployment bays. We have mechs. Hundreds of mechs." But his transmission was drowned out by the sound of the fertilizer plant coming to life. The building's walls retracted, revealing artillery positions. Massive cannons, freshly manufactured from the fertilizer produced over the past 3 years, swiveled toward Velkari positions. The greenhouses across the colony began to move. Their glass panels slid aside, and from beneath them rose fighter craft. Sleek, deadly ships that had been hidden in underground hangars, camouflaged beneath structures that looked like simple agricultural buildings. Hyun sat in the cockpit of one of those fighters, her hands steady on the controls. She had been flying crop dusters for 3 years, maintaining her cover as an agricultural pilot. But she was a combat veteran, and this was what she had trained for. Squadron 1 launch, came the command. Her fighter shot upward, followed by dozens of others. They climbed toward the Velkari ships in orbit, leaving trails of fire across the evening sky. On the ground, the Velkari forces scrambled to respond. But they were surrounded, caught in prepared positions with nowhere to retreat. The tractors they had seen earlier suddenly transformed, deploying weapons and armor plating. The harvesting machines revealed themselves as mobile artillery platforms, and from the underground irrigation system, from the tunnels the Velkari had thought carried only water, came soldiers. Thousands of them. They poured out of hidden access points wearing combat armor, carrying advanced weapons. The 50,000 farmers were revealing their true nature. 40,000 trained soldiers and 10,000 support personnel. June led his forces out of the command bunker, no longer pretending to be a simple security chief. His 500 visible guards had become 15,000 troops, all of them emerging from the underground network that had been built beneath the entire colony. Commander Thexmore watched in horror from his bridge as the situation fell apart. His ground forces were surrounded. His troops were reporting mechs, artillery, aircraft, military assets that weren't supposed to exist. The agricultural colony was fighting back with the power of a full military installation. "How?" he whispered. "How did we miss this?" One of his officers was shouting. "Sir, surface to orbit fire!" "Those water towers are weapons platforms." Thexmore's screen lit up with warnings as missiles streaked up from the planet's surface. 3 of his ships took direct hits. Not enough to destroy them, but enough to damage their systems and send a clear message. The humans could reach orbit. "Full retreat," he ordered. "All ships, pull back to high orbit. Ground forces, defensive positions only. We need to regroup." But there would be no regrouping. The harvest had begun, and the humans had been ready for 3 long years. Dawn broke over Taeyang 4 with the sound of war. Bora sat in the cockpit of her combat mech, feeling the machine respond to her movements like an extension of her own body. For 3 years she had pretended to be a warehouse supervisor, spending her days managing grain shipments and inventory reports. But before coming to Taeyang 4, she had piloted mechs in 2 major conflicts. Her hands remembered the controls perfectly. Red Squadron advanced to Sector 4. June's voice came through her headset. "Velkari forces are trying to regroup near the eastern fields." "Understood," Bora replied. She pushed her mech forward, and around her, 20 others did the same. They moved through the colony like metal giants, their footsteps shaking the ground. The early morning sun reflected off their armor, turning them into moving walls of light. The Velkari soldiers ahead of them had taken cover behind their landing craft. They opened fire as the mechs approached, their weapons spitting blue energy bolts. The shots hit the mech armor and bounced away harmlessly. These machines had been designed to withstand much heavier fire. Bora targeted the enemy position and fired. Her mech's cannon roared, sending a shell directly into the Velkari cover. The explosion sent soldiers flying. The others broke and ran, abandoning their position. "Enemy retreating," Bora reported, moving to secure the landing craft. Across the colony, similar scenes played out. The Velkari forces, caught completely by surprise, were being pushed back from every position. They had expected to face frightened farmers with light weapons. Instead, they were fighting a fully equipped military force that had been waiting for them. At the fertilizer plant, now revealed as an ammunition factory, Taemin commanded the artillery batteries. The massive guns that had been built over 3 years of chemical production were firing in steady rhythm. Each shot was carefully calculated, targeting Velkari positions without damaging the colony's infrastructure. "Target the enemy command post in Sector 7, Taman ordered. 3 rounds spread pattern. His crew loaded the shells and adjusted the aim. The guns fired with deep booming sounds that rolled across the fields. Seconds later, explosions bloomed in the distance. The Velkari command post, set up in what used to be a vegetable processing center, disappeared in smoke and fire. "Direct hit," an observer reported. "Enemy communications in that sector are down." Taman nodded and moved to the next target. His gunners were all experienced soldiers, but they had spent years working as chemical engineers and factory workers. Now they could finally use their real skills. In the sky above the colony, Hyun's fighter squadron engaged the Velkari air support. The alien craft were fast and well-armed, but they had been caught off guard. They had been prepared for a simple occupation mission, not a full military engagement. Hyun locked onto an enemy fighter and fired. Her missiles streaked through the air, trailing white contrails. The Velkari pilot tried to evade, but he was too slow. The explosion lit up the morning sky. "That's 3 for me," Hyun reported to her wing. "How are you doing?" "2 here," her wingman replied. "These guys aren't bad, but they weren't expecting resistance." "Nobody expects farmers to have fighter jets," Hyun said with a grim smile. She pulled her craft into a sharp turn, coming up behind another Velkari fighter. This pilot was better, executing tight maneuvers to shake her off. But Hyun had been flying combat missions for 10 years before coming to Taeyang 4. She matched every move, staying on his tail, waiting for the perfect moment. When it came, she fired. The enemy craft exploded in a ball of orange flame. On the ground, the Velkari forces were discovering that everything they had seen over the past day was a lie. The tractors that had been peacefully working the fields were now mobile weapon platforms, their agricultural equipment replaced with cannons and missile launchers. The harvesting machines had transformed into armored vehicles, carrying troops and supplies to the front lines. Even the fields themselves were different than they appeared. What the Velkari had thought were simple irrigation ditches were actually defensive trenches, pre-built and waiting to be used. The access roads between fields had been designed as perfect routes for military vehicles, with reinforced surfaces that could handle heavy tanks. Commander Thexmore watched the battle unfold from his ship, his face growing darker with each report. His 10,000 troops were being systematically destroyed by a force that shouldn't have existed. The agricultural colony was fighting like a military fortress. "How many troops do they have?" he demanded. "Initial estimates were 50,000 civilians," his intelligence officer said, his voice shaking. "Current assessment, 40,000 soldiers, sir. Maybe more. They were all here pretending to be farmers." 40,000? Thexmore's claws scraped against his console. "Our intelligence said 50,000 total population. The other 10,000 are support personnel, sir. Engineers, medical staff, logistics, but many of them are armed and fighting too." Thexmore stared at the tactical display. His forces marked in red were shrinking by the minute. The human positions marked in green had grown to cover the entire colony. His troops were surrounded, outgunned, and running out of options. "Order all ground forces to fall back to landing zone 1, he said. "We're evacuating." But even evacuation was not going to be simple. The humans had planned for that too. As the Velkari troops began their retreat, they found their path blocked by human soldiers who had emerged from the underground tunnel system. June's forces had been moving through those irrigation tunnels all morning, taking positions behind enemy lines. "Velkari forces, this is Commander June of the Taeyang Defense Force." June's voice boomed across the battlefield, broadcast through speakers that had been hidden in the agricultural equipment. "You are surrounded. Drop your weapons and surrender. You will not be harmed." Some Velkari units tried to fight their way through. They were met with overwhelming firepower. Other units, seeing no other choice, began laying down their weapons. In orbit, Thexmore made one last desperate decision. Target their command center with orbital strike. "Maybe we can destroy their leadership." "Sir, they have surface-to-orbit defenses," his weapons officer warned. "If we fire on the surface, they'll fire back." "I'm aware of that," Thexmore snapped. "Charge weapons." But before his ships could fire, every water tower in the colony opened up. The structures that the Velkari had dismissed as simple utilities were actually concealed missile batteries. Dozens of missiles streaked upward, their engines blazing. Thexmore's fleet scattered, trying to evade. Most of the missiles were shot down by point defense systems, but several got through. One of his destroyers took a direct hit to its engine section and went spinning out of control. Another battlecruiser lost its shield generators and had to retreat. "Cease fire," Thexmore ordered. "All ships withdraw to high orbit. Do not engage." The Velkari fleet pulled back, leaving their ground forces to their fate. By noon, it was over. The Velkari troops in the colony had either surrendered or been eliminated. Their landing craft sat silent in the fields, surrounded by human mechs and soldiers. Prisoners were being processed and moved to secure locations. Medical teams, the same people who had been running the colony clinic, were treating wounded on both sides. Daewon walked through the battlefield, surveying the results. Around him, his soldiers were already beginning to clean up. The mechs were returning to their silos. The fighters were landing at their hidden hangars. In a few hours, they would start covering everything again, restoring the agricultural appearance of the colony. He stopped at the edge of a grain field that had been damaged in the fighting. The grain had been trampled by mechs and scorched by weapons fire. It would need to be replanted. Hana joined him, her uniform dusty from the battle. She had spent the morning coordinating the biological weapons, non-lethal paralytic agents that had been deployed against several Velkari positions. The same chemical knowledge she used to create fertilizer could create other things too. "Casualties?" Daewon asked. "Light," Hana replied. 37 wounded, none seriously, 5 dead. The Velkari lost about 2,000 and we have 8,000 prisoners. Daewon nodded slowly. The numbers could have been much worse. The Velkari had walked into a trap, but they were still professional soldiers. They had fought well even in a hopeless situation. "What about the farms?" he asked. "How much damage to the actual crops?" "About 15% of the grain fields are damaged," Hana said. "The vegetable greenhouses are intact. We can replant the damaged areas within a week. The harvest will only be delayed slightly." "Good," Daewon said. "We need to maintain appearances. The galaxy needs to see that we're still farmers, even after this." "Farmers with very good security," Hana said with a slight smile. In the command center, Suman was fielding communications from across human space. News of the battle had spread quickly. Other colonies wanted to know what had happened. Military command was requesting detailed reports, and intelligence services from a dozen alien species were trying to gather information. She routed the most important message to Daewon. It was from Earth, from the Defense Council. "Congratulations on a successful harvest," the message read. "Maintain your cover. Let them wonder." Daewon smiled. The Velkari had learned an expensive lesson today. But the real message was for everyone else watching. 3 days after the battle, Commander Thexmore sat in a plain room in what used to be the colony's administration building. His hands were not bound and he had not been mistreated. The humans had been professional, almost polite. But he was still a prisoner, and that burned worse than any physical wound. The door opened and Daewon entered. He wore his simple colony administrator clothes, not a military uniform. He carried 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Thexmore before sitting down across from him. "I apologize for the delay," Daewon said. "We've been busy with cleanup operations, and of course replanting the damaged fields." Thexmore stared at him. "You're still pretending to be a farmer." "I am a farmer," Daewon replied calmly. "I've grown grain on this world for 3 years. I've managed harvests, dealt with crop diseases, worried about weather patterns. Everything I told your scouts was true. We do export food to 6 other colonies. We are an agricultural settlement. You're a military base." "We're both," Daewon said. He sipped his coffee. "Tell me, Commander, what did your intelligence report say about Taeyang 4? Thexmore was silent for a moment. Then reluctantly he answered, 50,000 colonists. Agricultural exports worth billions. Minimal military presence. No orbital defenses. No spacecraft capable of combat. Light weapons only. And all of that was true, Daewon said. We do have 50,000 people here. We do produce agricultural exports. We had no orbital defense platforms. Just weapons hidden in water towers, which aren't technically orbital defenses. Our spacecraft were listed as cargo transports, which they are, though they can be converted to fighters quickly. And we had light weapons, we just had a lot of them. You lied. We misdirected, Daewon corrected. There's a difference. Everything we reported was technically accurate. We just didn't mention certain details. The door opened again and Nari entered. She wore glasses and carried a data tablet, looking like a typical intelligence analyst, which Thexmore realized she probably was. "Commander Thexmore," she said, sitting down beside Daewon. "I'm Nari. I helped plan this operation. I thought you might want to understand how this happened." "I would like that very much," Thexmore said bitterly. Nari activated her tablet, and a holographic display appeared above the table. It showed a map of the border region between human and Velkari space. 3 years ago, our intelligence analysts noticed a pattern, she began. The Velkari Empire was expanding aggressively. You were conquering worlds, but you were selective. You avoided heavily defended military installations. Instead, you targeted what you perceived as soft targets: agricultural colonies, mining outposts, research stations. Thexmore said nothing. It was true. Why waste resources attacking fortified positions when there were easier targets available? "So we asked ourselves a question," Nari continued. "What if we made our military installations look like soft targets? What if we turned your strategy against you?" The holographic map zoomed in on Taiyang 4. This world was chosen carefully. Good location, valuable resources far from major military bases, perfect bait. We sent 40,000 soldiers here, along with 10,000 support personnel. And then we spent 3 years teaching them to be farmers. 3 years? Thexmore looked at Daewon. "You've been planning this for 3 years?" "Longer, actually," Daewon said. "It took a year to build the colony and create the infrastructure. Then 3 years to establish our cover. Every person here was military or trained militia. But we grew real crops. We produced real exports. We became a functioning agricultural settlement. Because the best cover is one that's actually true." Nari changed the display to show construction schematics. The grain silos were built to store grain but also to house combat mechs. The fertilizer plant does produce fertilizer, but it can also manufacture ammunition and chemical weapons. The irrigation system carries water to the fields, but the tunnels are large enough to move troops and equipment. "Dual purpose," Thexmore said slowly, beginning to understand. "Everything serves 2 functions." "Exactly," Nari said. "We learned this approach from human history. During ancient wars, civilizations would build defensive structures that also served peaceful purposes. Walls that protected cities but also managed water flow. Towers that watched for enemies but also served as granaries. We applied that same principle here but with modern technology." The holographic display changed again, showing other worlds. "Taiyang 4 isn't unique, Commander. We have 12 other agricultural colonies along the border. Each one is exactly like this. A real, functioning farm that's also a fully equipped military base. Your empire was planning to conquer them all, weren't you?" Thexmore felt his blood run cold. 12 more colonies like this? The Velkari had been planning a campaign to seize all the human agricultural worlds in the border region. It was supposed to be easy, profitable, and quick. "We would have lost thousands of soldiers," he whispered. "Yes," Daewon said simply, "and that was the point. We couldn't stop you from expanding, you're too strong. But we could make expansion so costly that you'd choose to stop on your own." Nari pulled up more data. "We studied your tactics extensively. You're very good at what you do, Commander. Your forces are well-trained and professional, but you follow predictable patterns. You always scout targets thoroughly. You always choose the easiest path. You always assume that civilians are not a threat. We turned every one of those patterns against you," Daewon added. "We let you scout us as thoroughly as you wanted. We made ourselves look like the easiest target possible. We appeared to be nothing but civilians, and you walked right into our trap." Thexmore slumped in his chair. It was brilliant in a cruel way. The humans had used the Velkari's own doctrine against them. They had weaponized perception and expectation. "Your Empress will want to know this," Nari said. She pressed a button, and the holographic display changed one final time. Now it showed dozens of worlds throughout human space. Some were marked in green, others in blue, others in red. "These are human colonies. Can you tell me which ones are military bases and which ones are real agricultural settlements?" Thexmore studied the display. They all looked the same. Similar populations, similar exports, similar infrastructure. There was no way to tell which were defended and which were not. "I can't," he admitted. "Neither can anyone else," Nari said. "That's the real lesson here, Commander. From now on, every human colony is a potential threat. You'll never know which farms are just farms and which ones are hiding armies. You can't risk invading any of them, because any one of them might turn out to be another Taeyang 4. You've made all of your colonies dangerous, Thexmore said, even the ones that really are just farms. We'll have to treat them all as military targets. Yes, Daewon said, which means you'll have to commit real military resources to attack any of them. No more easy conquests, no more soft targets. Every human world is now defended, even if we haven't put a single extra soldier there. Because you can't afford to assume we haven't. Thexmore understood now. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They had changed the entire strategic situation along the border. The Velkari Empire would have to completely rethink its expansion plans. We're sending you home, Commander, Daewon said. You and all your surviving soldiers. We'll return your wounded as soon as they're stable enough to travel. We're not interested in keeping prisoners. You want me to carry this message back, Thexmore said. We want you to tell the truth, Daewon replied. Tell your Empress what happened here. Tell her about the other colonies. Tell her that humanity is not weak just because we prefer peace. We're farmers, Commander, but farmers know how to harvest. Nari stood up. Your ship has been repaired. You'll be escorted to the border and released. I suggest you use the journey to think about what you've learned here. They left him alone in the room with his cold coffee and his bitter thoughts. Thexmore sat there for a long time, replaying everything in his mind. The humans had beaten him without superior technology or greater numbers. They had beaten him with patience, planning, and perfect understanding of their enemy. Outside the window, he could see the colony returning to normal. Farmers, real farmers or soldiers pretending to be farmers, he could no longer tell, were working in the fields. Mechs were being moved back into the grain silos. The fighter craft were disappearing into their hidden hangars. In a few days, Taeyang 4 would look exactly like it had before the invasion. An innocent agricultural colony, growing grain and vegetables under peaceful skies. But Thexmore would never see it that way again. And neither would anyone else in the Velkari Empire. The humans had planted a seed of doubt, and it would grow into forests of fear. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. On the Velkari homeworld, Empress Kethal watched the footage for the third time. Her court stood silent around her throne, no one daring to speak. The holographic display showed the battle at Taeyang 4 in brutal detail. Her forces landing confidently, the humans retreating. And then the moment when everything changed, when the grain silos opened and an army emerged. The footage had been released by Earth's government. They had made sure every news network in known space received a copy. The message was clear. This is what happens when you attack human colonies. How many troops did we lose? Kethal asked quietly. 2,000 dead, her military advisor replied. 8,000 captured. 3 ships damaged. The humans returned our soldiers yesterday. They sent them back with medical supplies and this. He handed her a data crystal. Kethal inserted it into her console, and Commander Thexmore's face appeared. He looked tired and defeated as he made his report. Your Majesty, Thexmore said in the recording, I must inform you that our intelligence regarding human colonies was incomplete. Taeyang 4 was not an agricultural settlement. It was a military fortress disguised as one. They have other colonies like it. We cannot determine which human worlds are defended and which are not. I recommend we halt all expansion into human territory until we can reassess the situation. Kethal stopped the recording and looked at her advisors. How many colonies were we planning to conquer? 15 in the next phase, her military advisor said. All agricultural worlds. We expected minimal resistance. And now any one of them could be another Taeyang 4, Kethal said. She felt a headache forming behind her eyes. How did our intelligence miss this? They didn't miss anything, Your Majesty, her intelligence chief said carefully. The humans didn't lie in their reports. They simply didn't mention certain details. Every piece of data we gathered was accurate. We just interpreted it wrong. Because we saw what we expected to see, Kethal said bitterly. She understood now. The humans had used the Velkari's own assumptions against them. What are our options? We could attack with overwhelming force, and the military advisor suggested. Treat every human colony as a major military target from the start. That would require 10 times the resources, the economic minister protested. We can't sustain that kind of military spending. And what if we commit massive forces to a world that really is just a farm? We'd look foolish. What if we use orbital bombardment? Another advisor suggested. Destroy the colonies from space without risking ground troops. Then we destroy the resources we wanted to capture, the economic minister said. And we prove to the galaxy that we're afraid of human farmers. The political cost would be enormous. Kethal listened to them argue, but she had already made her decision. The humans had won. Not just the battle at Taiyang 4, but the strategic game. They had made it too expensive, too risky, too uncertain to attack their colonies. Send a diplomatic message to Earth, she ordered. Tell them we want to negotiate a treaty. The throne room erupted in shocked murmurs. The Velkari Empire did not negotiate. They conquered. But today they would make an exception. Across the galaxy, other civilizations were watching and learning. In the council chambers of the Praxian Federation, military planners studied the footage from Taiyang 4 with careful attention. This changes everything, one of them said. We've been assuming human colonies are vulnerable targets, but they could all be military bases. We have trade agreements with the humans, another planner pointed out. We should probably honor those agreements very carefully from now on. On the Caltran homeworld, the ruling council held an emergency session. They had been considering expanding into a region of space that bordered human territory. Those plans were quickly abandoned. If the humans can do this on one world, they can do it on all of them, the council leader said. We will not risk finding out which colonies are defended. Even species that were neutral toward humanity took notice. Human traders suddenly found themselves receiving much more respect at alien ports. Human diplomats discovered that their words carried more weight in negotiations. The galaxy had learned a lesson. Humans might be peaceful, but they were not weak. On Taiyang 4, life was returning to normal. Or rather, to the appearance of normal. Hana stood in a greenhouse examining tomato plants. They had suffered some damage during the battle, and she was carefully nursing them back to health. Around her, workers moved between rows of vegetables, checking growth rates and adjusting nutrient levels. To any observer, it was a typical day on a farm, but Hana knew that beneath her feet, in the tunnel system disguised as irrigation pipes, weapons were being stored and maintained. The mechs had been returned to their silos, but they were ready to deploy again at a moment's notice. The fighter craft were tucked away in their hidden hangars, but pilots like Hyun ran practice drills every day. How are the tomatoes? Daewon asked, entering the greenhouse. They'll recover, Hana replied. Another week and we'll be back to full production. The grain fields are replanted too. We might even exceed our normal harvest this year. Good, Daewon said. He looked around the greenhouse at the rows of growing plants. We need to maintain the cover. The galaxy is watching us now. I know, Hana said. I've been getting messages from agricultural researchers asking about our techniques. Everyone suddenly wants to know how we grow such successful crops in border regions. Daewon smiled slightly. Tell them the truth. Good soil, proper irrigation, and excellent pest control. They both knew what that really meant. Good defensive positions, proper supply lines, and excellent military preparation. A few days later, a new trade delegation arrived at Taiyang 4. They were from the Benthic Commerce Union, a neutral trading alliance. Their ship landed at the same pad where the previous delegation had landed months ago. But these visitors were different. They were nervous. Daewon met them at the landing pad wearing his simple administrator clothes and offering a warm smile. Welcome to Taiyang 4. I hope you had a pleasant journey. The lead delegate, a four-armed creature named Vextal, bowed deeply. Thank you for receiving us, Administrator. We come in peace and friendship. Of course, Daewon said, slightly puzzled by the formal tone. Would you like a tour of our facilities? Yes, please, Vextal said quickly. Though we don't want to impose. If you're busy with military matters, we can come back another time. Understanding dawned on Daewon. They were afraid. We're not busy at all, he said gently. We're farmers. Let me show you around. He led them through the colony just as he had done with previous visitors. They toured the fields where workers operated harvesting machines. They visited the grain silos, where elevators moved tons of wheat to storage. They inspected the fertilizer plant where chemicals were mixed and processed. But the delegates saw everything differently now. They noticed how the workers moved with military precision. They observed that the harvesting machines looked suspiciously armored. They saw that the grain silos had unusually thick walls. At the fertilizer plant, Vextal stopped and stared at the large storage tanks. These tanks, they're very large. We produce fertilizer for 6 colonies, Daewon explained. We need large-scale production capabilities. What he didn't say was that those same capabilities could produce other chemicals if needed. But Vextal's imagination filled in that blank without any help. During lunch, the delegates ate the food grown on Taiyang 4, fresh bread from the colony's grain, vegetables from the greenhouses, protein from the processing plants. It was delicious. It was also proof that this really was a working farm. Your crops are excellent, Vextal said carefully. Some of the best I've tasted. Thank you, Daewon replied. We take our agriculture seriously here. I can see that, Vextal said. Then, after a pause, I heard about your recent trouble with the Velkari. A misunderstanding, Daewon said calmly. They thought they could take our colony. We showed them otherwise. But we're not looking for conflict. We just want to farm in peace, of course, Vextal said quickly. We would never threaten your colony. We value our trade relationship very much. I'm glad to hear that, Daewon said. We value it too. The negotiations that followed were the easiest of Daewon's career. The delegates agreed to every term without question. They raised their purchase orders by 30%. They offered better shipping rates. They practically begged to maintain good relations with Taiyang 4. As their ship lifted off at the end of the day, Daewon watched it go with a thoughtful expression. Ji-won, the colony's diplomatic liaison, joined him at the observation window. They were terrified, she said. I know, Daewon replied. I tried to put them at ease, but they kept seeing threats everywhere. That's the point, isn't it? Ji-won said. We've made the galaxy afraid of us, even when we're just trying to be friendly farmers. Is that a bad thing? Ji-won considered the question. I don't know. We're safer now. No one will attack us, but we're also more isolated. People are afraid to trust us and they'll adjust, Daewon said. Fear fades. Respect lasts longer. We've earned respect, he was right. In the weeks and months that followed, human colonies across the border region noticed a change. Pirate attacks stopped. Aggressive neighbors became cautious. Trade improved. Diplomatic negotiations went more smoothly.